Now I'd like to introduce our next Gilbreth lecturer, Dr. Amanda Randles. Amanda is the Alfred Winborn Mordecai and Victoria Stover Mordecai Associate Professor of Biomedical Sciences and Biomedical Engineering at Duke University. She received her PhD in Applied Physics from Harvard University. Dr. Randles will discuss the recognition that the digital twin technology is revolutionizing healthcare by enabling personalized vascular simulations and proactive patient care. Please welcome Dr. Randles.
Well, thank you very much. And I'm very honored and excited to talk to you guys all about our work today. So the work that I'm really passionate about is using, similar to what we just heard, like cross-disciplinary approaches to solve large-scale biomedical problems. I really like seeing what we can do with some of the world's biggest supercomputers and advanced algorithms, different data, different modalities, and kind of trying to bring that together and seeing how we can approach and improve and address issues that are really pressing in healthcare. So what we're hoping to do is make a paradigm shift. We want to go from the status quo where the patient is exhibiting symptoms, where they might have chest pain or weight gain or something that's going to cause you to go to the hospital or go to the doctor's office. We want to be able to identify that before it's going to happen, because conventionally the way this is going to work, you have weight gain, you have chest pain, something goes wrong, you go to the hospital, the clinician is going to react to what is happening and try to mitigate those problems. We want to help the clinician identify it earlier so they can act proactively and address the concern before it arises. And that's kind of where we see, it feels like some feedback. Can you guys hear me okay? Okay. So that's where we see digital twins really playing a role. We want to help the clinician be able to identify the risk and likely issues before they occur so they can proactively address it. And we're trying to create these digital twins. We see digital twins already being commonplace in other fields. We see them being used for jet engines, for bridges. Companies like GE are already creating digital twins of these jet engines. And what's important is that they're not creating just idealized representations of what a jet engine might be. They're making specific models of what that specific jet engine is like that's being informed by sensors that allows them to track the health of that jet engine and identify when that jet engine needs to come in for repair and do that informed for that particular engine. And what we really want to do is create that for patients and have kind of a check engine light for the patient so the doctor knows ahead of time you should come in and we should try to act and help them. So kind of stepping back and trying to just build some intuition of what we're trying to build here. If we start looking at just the short term, so something really simple of what you're trying to do if you want to go exercise for the day, how do you make the decision of what to do? We already have a lot of information based on like aggregate population information about how much is recommended to exercise each day or how you should eat healthier or what you should be doing. But what about identifying what's going to make a tangible difference for that specific patient based on their, how much sleep they've had, how tired they are, what they've eaten that day, and really identify what's going to be best for that specific person. And how do you identify, you want to go for a 45-minute run, should you focus on speed or should you focus on endurance, or what would be best for that person on that specific day? It would be great if we had a digital twin that would know, how much sleep you had, where you're at, how tired you are, how much caffeine you've had, and be able to go through and virtually test out all of these different options for you, and then come back and say, given where you are at today, you're going to get your best bang for your buck if you just do a slow and steady run today. Jumping ahead. We've already seen steps in this direction. If you've used like the guidance and the resilience feature and the readiness feature that you see in Aura applications and other Fitbits and like other wearable ideas, we've seen steps towards this, but we want to try to connect it to the healthcare side of it. So we care about making people, be able to make the most out of their exercise regime. What we really want to be able to do is identify ways to make a person less susceptible to long-term plaque buildup that's going to lead to diseases like heart disease and atherosclerosis. In the last 20 years, we've gotten really good at being able to characterize vulnerable arterial states, but we've struggled with how to turn that information into something actionable to help people really identify it early and make some kind of action based on it. What we're hoping is that these digital twins can capture blood flow over time that's going to not only allow us to assess if someone's arteries go into these vulnerable states, but identify how long they're spending in those vulnerable states and help us identify what needs to change so that we can reduce the amount of time that someone's arteries are spending in those vulnerable states. And that's what's really going to allow us to shift from this reactive approach to healthcare to more of a proactive approach by really establishing these digital twins that are going to capture months or hopefully even years of time. So in my work, we're focused on the vascular digital twins, so I'll focus more narrowing in just on the vascular side in the rest of this talk. What we're building are personalized patient-specific models. And can you help me play the video? Thanks. So what you're going to see is this, what we're building is this real 3D representation. So it's a virtual model of a patient's vasculature. What you're seeing here is someone's coronary arteries, and we're looking at the blood flow through their coronary arteries. You're seeing the red blood cells interacting with each other, interacting with the fluid around it. And the amount of time that we're spending at different locations and different forces at different points along these arteries is going to dictate where disease is going to localize, where you're going to see progression of disease. And understanding this can really be predictive of where these locations are going to occur. But what's important to notice here is that it's not just, the geometry of someone's arteries or just their heart rate or something you're getting from a wearable. It's really the synergistic information coming together of both the flow information, the heart rate data, and someone's geometry. So we need imaging data, we need sensor data, we need all of this information kind of coming together to really understand someone's blood flow in 3D over time. So the way we're building this, we're making them, we need patient-specific personalized models. So we're getting data from medical images. So you're taking like CT scans, MRI scans, and then we go through a process called data segmentation. So that's what you're seeing here, where we go through in a Z-stack. So you're going through and trying to identify the geometry of the coronary arteries and building up a 3D representation of that specific person's arteries. We end up getting just a 3D mesh file that's representing their geometry, and then we feed that into our flow simulation. We've created a flow simulation software called Harvey, but we run it on large-scale supercomputers, and then we get out models like this. So you're getting a 3D flow model. That's kind of what you saw in the previous video, of just a 3D flow model understanding that patient-specific hemodynamic patterns. And then now we're connecting those models to wearable devices so we can get a realistic view of what's happening remotely, non-invasively, driven by the activities that that patient is undergoing, and start trying to get a view of their longitudinal hemodynamic maps over long periods of time. Okay, so the question then is where are we at and how are things going? So the first step is right now, the exciting part is there's widening acceptance of these kinds of models in the clinic already. We're seeing FDA-approved tools that are really personalized models being used in the clinic and replacing some types of invasive measurements. A lot of this has been pioneered by already NIE members involved. And one of the canonical examples is looking at what's called fractional flow reserve. It's used for coronary artery disease. So when a doctor is trying to decide if you need a stent or not, it's actually pretty easy, where they put an invasive guide wire in your artery, and they measure the pressure before and after the lesion, and it's just the ratio of that pressure. So if that ratio is above or below 0.8, they decide if you're getting a stent or not. These computational tools have shown that they can match non-invasively by using the medical imaging, running these flow simulations. You can measure in the virtual model what that fractional flow reserve would be, and that can match what you would get from an invasive guide wire. So we're seeing this being able to move to a non-invasive remote way of monitoring this information. What I think is almost a little more exciting is you can actually get more information from the patient. So we can access biomarkers that you can't measure directly. What you're seeing here is you can see vortices occurring. So we're looking at vorticity that's coming up in these patients. For patients that are right at the borderline, so if they're right at that 0.8 and they may or may not be on that borderline of being chosen to get the stent if they're on the other side of it, what we've seen is that patients that have higher vorticity end up having more adverse events down the line. So if you use these computational models, you can access these more complex biomarkers that you wouldn't be able to measure otherwise and identify patients that really should have been getting a stent in the first place and help us better stratify these patients and classify these patients and identify who should be treated and what's the best treatment for these patients. So all of that was focusing on one single heartbeat, and it's great that we're seeing acceptance into the clinic, but it's all looking at a single representative heartbeat, maybe looking at, a half a second or a few seconds of time. What we're seeing today is this pivotal shift where the number of people wearing sensors and getting dynamic, continuous data about their activity as they go about their normal activities is really skyrocketing. I imagine many of you, I'm currently wearing like an Oura Ring and an Apple Watch. I imagine most of you are wearing, what do you guys wear now? Do you have Fitbits or what are you guys wearing? Pretty much the statistic I keep quoting is like in 2022, there were 115 million different registered Apple Watch users, just Apple Watch alone. We're seeing everybody is starting to wear these kinds of, most people have some kind of device or just on your cell phone, you can get your step count. Wearables are getting to be really, really pervasive. And from our end, that's really exciting because it means, we have access to data in a new way where the patient is empowered and the patient now owns that data. And we now have access to data that's not being taken in the clinic. And so for the first time, we had a reason to run these blood flow simulations longer than 1 or 2 heartbeats. So we want to be able to capture by seeing what's happening to the patient as they go about their daily lives. We want to actually be able to run these flow models over longer periods of time, and we can understand how long you're spending in these at-risk states. The problem is that these computational models are incredibly computationally intense. So I mentioned that I really like large-scale supercomputers. We tend to run our models in some of the biggest supercomputers in the world. The video that I had shown you beforehand, we made it back in 2010, so it is a little bit old at this stage. But just to make that video took the entirety of the world's biggest supercomputer at the time. So we had to take the entire thing, which was at that time, probably like 140,000 processors working together. And it took us 6 full hours just to get 1 heartbeat, which is great. And it was a very fun computational stunt to get to. But if you want to make this usable, you can kind of think about weather models where if you're trying to understand and calculate, when is a hurricane going to hit land and where is it going to hit land? If it takes you 2 years to model and identify where the hurricane is going to hit land, and it's going to hit land next week, that is not very helpful. If it takes me 3 years to model and identify that you're going to have a heart attack next week, it's less helpful. So from our end, we need to address the computational component. And I mentioned this was done in 2010 when we first started doing this. One thing to point out is just waiting for a faster chip and waiting for chips and computers to get faster isn't enough. We need to have different algorithms, we need to have a different approach, and we needed to be able to kind of push this forward. When we started trying to do this and to connect it to the wearables, the longest 3-dimensional flow simulation that had ever been run only captured about 30 heartbeats, which is only a few seconds of time. And if we really want to move this to weeks or months or longer, something had to change. And that's where, when I'm at Duke right now, the students there, I'm very lucky, we're willing to take on this kind of challenge, and they're really we're willing to try to think outside the box. And working with them, we were able to kind of address 2 major challenges. So one challenge was how do you actually connect this, connect the wearable device to the flow simulation and run the flow model from the data that you're getting from a wearable. And then the second problem was how do we actually extend the time domain? So they created this parallel on time approach that allowed us to kind of break down the chunks into different time periods. So kind of thinking through, when you're sitting at your desk at 10 a.m. today, is your blood flow really that different than when you're sitting at your desk at 11 a.m. or 10 a.m. the next day? And how do we find repeated patterns that we can piece back together and kind of find this and bring it in a parallel approach to breaking down what normally would be a causal method? We introduced what we called the longitudinal hemodynamic frameworks. We call it LHMF, which is what you'll see on the slide. And then we ended up shutting down the compute cluster that I had at Duke for probably about 6 months and dedicating the entire time to just running a really long flow simulation, which really long at that point was only maybe about 750 heartbeats. But it gave us the explicit simulation which interesting, it does not show up on the screen for some reason, but you would see like a black line going along here. It gave us the explicit flow simulation of what the results would be if you were to model hundreds of heartbeats. And then we compared that to what we got with the LHMF, which we only ran with a few compute cycles running in the cloud, and it allowed us to show that you could actually get to these much longer time periods. And then the student really pushed it further. So the longest we've been able to do so far is run from wearable data and capture about 6 weeks of time. And this is really critical because it allowed us to get away from the conventional approach where we would have like a representative resting heartbeat or a representative exercise heartbeat to see how someone's blood flow might be, to really understand how blood flow was changing across several weeks based on real activity from someone's wearable device. This allowed us to then try to start setting up this technology to have the next stage for this development of these vascular digital twins. This is key because these advances alongside the wearable technology means we have this unique ability to screen people continuously, automatically, and remotely for these early signs of disease. We're currently working with doctors in a range of different diseases. So we have some where we're looking at carotid artery disease, we're still working on coronary, we're looking at heart failure, and we're trying to understand how the patient's data is changing as they're going about different activities, from exercising to just reading to listening to music and what you would do in your normal daily life. And we're hoping that this is going to set us up to be able to monitor and identify stages for delivering real-time, remote, personalized healthcare down the line. What's also interesting is we're able to go beyond just real-time remote monitoring, but we're working to move to not just a digital twin that's in sync with your wearable devices, but kind of looking prospectively. So we could try to test, if you were to start doing a different exercise regime, how would that affect you? If we gave you one treatment versus another, so thinking back to the stent example, when a doctor is going in and trying to figure out, what action they should take, they could give you a multiple, there are many different types of stents they could give you, there are different treatments they could proceed with. Before they enter the operating room, they can go in, try to virtually give you a different stent, and then project out and say, if you were to have this level of exercise over this 6 months, you have this likelihood of whether or not you're going to have that stenosis return or that plaque build up again. So how do we kind of look down these hypothetical paths with different treatment options and really inform their decisions before they're going to the operating room? Using these prospective models, we can both help them identify what's the best treatment for you, but also give more personalized guidance to those patients going forward. So everything I've focused on has really been the vascular digital twin side, but there's a lot of opportunity for digital twins in various different spaces and kind of connecting in. There are many subfields getting genetic data, tumor types. You can kind of imagine if we had data coming from implantable devices feeding into blood chemistry, joint stress, if we had any information from the ingestibles. I think there's a lot of opportunity to really bring in these new technologies and kind of build out these digital twins in different spaces, and I think there's a huge impact for the potential of digital twins in healthcare. And with that, I will stop and ask for questions and acknowledge the broad team that has been helping with this work.
Need a microphone over here, too.
There's one over there. We just don't have the person to manage it yet. Yes, ma'am.
My name is Sarah Morales. I'm one of the chaperones from Cabrillo. This is kind of a dual question we were thinking about, but why did you start with, cardiovascular instead of those other forms you mentioned, like neurology and stuff like that?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think there are so many different applications. So really, I would say the personalized flow modeling, coronary disease has been one of the first where we're really seeing acceptance. So there's a lot of companies where they've already gotten FDA approval for, metrics like fractional flow reserve that you can get over that single heartbeat. And so a lot of it is like the cardiologists are used to seeing flow simulations. They're open to seeing the flow simulations. And it was a really open group ready to start doing these projects. And we needed to validate somewhere. So starting with where you could validate the model with the conventional fractional flow reserve and then build out to longer periods. But we're now branching out, we're doing carotid because it's easier to measure with the Doppler. You can access the data there. So there are advantages to different areas and branching out easier.
Hi, my name is Christina Perez. I'm a senior at Somalia Academy. And my question to you was if this could be personalized per like patient or person. For example, if they had an existing heart condition or heart disease, would you take into account the condition and or medication that they could be taking?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So she's asking like how we personalize it, if they have different conditions, and if we could take into account like their medication. And so when we personalize the flow model, you can actually like we can personalize it down to the hematocrit level. So like the percentage of red blood cells. We can even go to the point of taking into account if you have sickle cell anemia. We can model individual red blood cells like you saw in that model. We don't always have to go to that level, but we can. We drive it from your cardiac output derived from personalized models, and there are options to kind of make it as patient-specific as we can based on what we can model. And then in certain disease areas, like if you know that they're anemic or if there are certain conditions, we can take that into account, and it's important to use.
Hi, my name is Kingston Nash. I'm from Simile Academy, and I was wondering, at this moment, what do you think the best wearable is for tracking stats and predicting health problems?
He's asking what the best wearable is at the moment for predicting health problems. I think it's hard to comment on. I would say each one has different advantages. So it's, you have, like Aura is fantastic for sleep and understanding the sleep stages and really getting into that space. And things like Aura and other rings are really great because you have more adherence where when someone has, when you charge your Apple Watch, you may take it off and forget that you're wearing it and things like that. But then there are other devices that are better for, like the Whoop and like other sides that are for when you're looking at health for athletics and performance. And it really depends on which area you're looking at. A lot of our studies, we're doing a lot. We have some with Fitbit right now. So we're using all of them, and it kind of varies. It does, for us, a lot of it ends up being like the rings are very helpful in that people wear them long term. And it's harder to train, your kid isn't going to be able to pick up the ring as easily and put it on and have the wrong person wearing it or different data, which is also something we have to think about of, people not wearing it for time periods, battery life of the wearables, and missing data and pieces like that.
What about price?
That is important. So that's where we've been really focused on everything we're trying to do. Every study I'm doing currently, we are using commercially available wearables and trying to, at a minimum, not have see how far we can get with commercially available wearables. But it really does. Yeah, obviously, the price can vary significantly, and we're doing a lot of studies to try to understand when is it needed, and which there are a lot of lower costs where if you're just looking at heart rate and you're just looking at step count, you can get to the lower cost and they're perfectly fine. So trying to understand when you need the higher granularity is really important.
Hi, I'm Adrian Gregos, and I wanted to know if you could in the future maybe do what you did for the vascular system, but in the nervous system.
Yeah, so he's asking if we could apply the work in the vascular to the nervous system, and I think that's a great point. There are a ton of computational models being built for patient-specific modeling of on the neuro side, and I think I think a lot of these applications really apply. The method that we used in the algorithm for setting up the longitudinal hemodynamic framework would apply to any kind of long-term series data. So you could kind of apply those two different, I think it would be pretty generalizable.
We have a question up here.
All right, so I'm Jesus Wolf. I'm a senior at Cabrillo High School. My question is, I have a heart condition where my heart was enlarged by 20%, and it's kind of more of an endurance thing. Can you make a predictability on how much my heart can handle, or joints would be able to handle? For athletic wise, your muscle tissue, how much stress can you put on a muscle tissue without it tearing?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So asking about with different disease areas, if you can kind of predict, how the impact on different joints or like long-term, how much you can really handle. And that's definitely something that we're trying to look at. So trying to understand how do you look at the long-term effect and wear and tear on this and how it affects other areas. All of our models currently are purely the flow-based, so it's more, how is it going to affect the endothelial cells and the heart itself or the coronary arteries on themselves. But it's something of trying to understand like the sustained, extra work being done and how that affects it is definitely an area that you can use these models for.
Hello? Hi, I'm Kemi here from Cabrillo High
Yes.
School again. I wanted to ask if, just in case you have like a Fitbit or a Apple Watch, what if it gives you the wrong information and you treat something that's not wrong?
That's a great question. So his question is like, what if you get the wrong information and you treat something that like there isn't an issue? And it's been really interesting of like when you have stats like 115 million people that are like using the Apple Watch, it changes the like false positive, false negative rate is suddenly 1% of those people is actually like a huge amount of a huge number. And we've had a lot of discussions when you're talking to people at companies like Apple of like you don't want to accidentally overwhelm, we don't want to send out some kind of alert that's going to overwhelm the healthcare system because you accidentally just told 100,000 people to run to their doctor. So it's a huge issue and something that needs to be taken very seriously. A lot of the way we're trying to handle it is trying to predict multiple metrics. So there's like the key metric that you identify during discovery that we're saying, whether it's vorticity or whatever the biomarker is that we're trying to look for. But then we're also trying to figure out something else that we can be predicting that you're then measuring with one of the sensors or something else that's coming from the wearable data as well. So you're kind of calibrating and self-calibrating and identifying, did it go off the rails? Has something gone wrong? So for us, it's like if you're based off your CT scan and maybe at some point your CT scan is no longer valid because you have had plaque buildup or something, you also want that to be able to be caught of like how is the model still valid and being used? So having a secondary marker that is serving not as a predictor and an identifier of disease, but as a calibration that it's, this is still accurate, it's correct for that patient is a critical part of this that we don't really talk about as much because it's like the secondary piece, but is really important. And even, things like if your kid were to if someone were to pick up my Apple Watch and put it on and it's been calibrated for me, you don't want it to be like, oh no, suddenly, your heart rate is significantly changed, you better go to the doctor when it's, how do we actually identify these things and make sure that it's really safe is a really, really important part of all of this. It's a great question.
Okay, her question was answered.
Okay.
Move on to the next one.
He's a senior in high school.
I'm Eric Atamian, and unfortunately, I'm not a student at Samuel Academy. And that's why I didn't get the part about accessing a biomarker purely from a modeling aspect without interaction with the physical sample. So.
Yeah, so for us, it's everything we're doing, we're only looking at diseases where you would have, you have to have some kind of medical imaging. So we need that patient-specific geometry, so it's not completely just derived from, heart rate or the wearable device. It is pulling, you have your CT scan, you have, the shape of that person's arteries, and then we're using data from their EHR, from their electronic health record, if we know information about, viscosity, hematocrit, things like that, to then set the parameters for the blood flow simulation that are then being driven by heart rate and data from the wearables in real time. So it is connecting to you have to have all of these other pieces in place. It wouldn't be something at this stage that would be generic for anybody who didn't have a scan or didn't have those initial medical conditions that you would have on record.
Lana, you got someone? Yeah.
So my name is Anthony Rizzo from Cabrillo High School, and I'd wondered how you make your vascular models. I seen you had a full body 3D vascular model. How do you
Yes.
make that just from a Fitbit?
So typically it's a great question of how do we actually make these models? I can try to see if I can go quickly. So basically we get a CT scan. If we kind of go back, you can kind of see here. So the CT scan is like a Z stack, so a 3D stack of all of these slices. And then you kind of go through at each point. And it used to be, I'm getting old, it was when we first did it, someone manually went through and colored the outline of each vessel. And they would do that at each level going through, and then we'd connect it and make a mesh. Now there are AI tools that can do that for you. So now but typically we're using a lot of, we do have we have other options. We can go from like angiograms as well, but typically it's like doing this 3D segmentation, creating an STL file, which if you've done anything with like 3D printing, or if you look at like character design, like Pixar, they use the same kind of, these 3D triangulated meshes representing those geometries. It's the same kind of mesh file you'd put into a 3D printer, and we make that of the vessels.
Hello, I'm Tyler from Samuel Academy. And looking through earlier, you showed us a model that said it was from 2010, if I believe, correct? It's been 15 years from now. So how has this technology progressed since then? And to take it a step further, how do you believe this technology will, or what do you hope and expect from this technology 15 years from now even? Because conceptually, this technology is amazing, has so many possibilities, so I'd really love to hear your feedback on that.
No, that's a great question. So he's asking, the video that we showed before is from 2010. There's been a lot of advances. So there are basic things like that model that I was showing. At that time, it did take a full 6 hours on like 144,000 processors. We can now run, a coronary flow simulation probably on 1,000 processors in half an hour, 45 minutes. So just like the algorithm, but that's only getting one heartbeat. But you can get that one heartbeat much faster. We also now, so the video that you're seeing had, so it has all the red blood cells. That the resolution we could get down to at that stage was probably like 10 micron resolution, meaning you have an underlying grid that's just having one grid point every 10 microns. And a red blood cell is about 10 microns, so you didn't have a lot of resolution about if the shape of the red blood cell, the deformation. And now we can actually get down to the level of individual receptors and individual, we do other work where we're looking at cancer cells moving through, and we can look at the individual ligand receptor adhesion of a cancer cell on the side of the wall. So you're getting a much, much, much finer resolution of the models. And you can get we're now able to look at sickle cell where you have different shapes, different stiffness of the red blood cells, the stickiness of the red blood cells you can actually take into account, where we were really just kind of approximating the shape of the red blood cell back in 2010. And then looking forward, right now it's been in the last 2 or 3 years that we're able to, and a lot of it's more, the wearables didn't exist. There was no need to run models for much longer. So we now have the wearables, and we're now able to run longer simulations, but it is that we have different ways to get to these longer simulations. So between, the use of AI and surrogate models, along with different computational advances, we're finally getting to the point where we can get, 6 months of someone's data. And I think that's where it's in the next 15 years of having this be actually usable out, translating out of the research lab and see people actually getting these 3D flow profiles and using them to screen and monitor people is kind of where we're hoping we're going to see things go.
Okay, we're going to be, I think, 3 more questions. And this gentleman with the white shirt is going to do the last question. So you've got one up there.
Hi. Oh, can you see? Hi. Oh, you can see me? Okay. Is it on? Okay. Hi, my name is Ranelli Rio Gabino. I'm a senior from Cabrillo High School. And my question to you is, due to AI being used more now, do you think digital twins can replace doctors or will it just help them?
So it's a great question of especially with AI, are we trying to replace doctors or really just help them? And I think at this stage, the doctors are still playing a critical role. There are still, we need the expertise. We need we need their part of it. And a lot of this is just getting them more information so they can take into account, everything going on about that patient along with this kind of longitudinal flow information to make their decisions. So I mentioned, trying to have, the virtual surgery before they go into the operating room, it's giving them that information to test, if I have these 3 different operations, which one should I do? But then when you go in real time and you're seeing that patient, there are, real-time decisions that need the years of clinical practice where you never know what's going to happen. It's really just giving them more aid and information and kind of replacing them. But that's a great question.
Okay, in the white shirt there.
Okay, my name is George Pathin, and I'm from Cabrillo High School, 11th grader. And I was wondering if one of these applications could be used towards monitoring pregnancies to determine or to monitor and predict the health of babies and the woman.
No, that's a fantastic question. So the question is, like, could we use this for maternal monitoring and monitoring during pregnancy? And I think that's definitely, like, there are so many complications where we need more information. We need, like, and these kinds of models could definitely help there. We've even talked to people because you do have like high resolution models of like the fetus and like of trying to get different models of that from the maternity side. We've had a lot of discussions. We haven't gone in that direction yet, but it's somewhere like I think it'd be really interesting because there's also lots of interesting blood flow patterns and like it's a good, but it's definitely a space where interestingly, it ends up being like there are like the wearable you use ends up being different, and there are pieces of like if you're having, like the women often get swollen and like the Aura rings don't work as well in those cases because they can't wear them as often because like, so it's, kind of figuring out like which devices are going to work in that case and how do you use it is part of it, but it's definitely a space of interest.
Okay. Final question right here.
Hi, my name is Walter Sevilla. I'm from Samuel Academy. And my question is, in our constantly monitored society, how would this data be protected and stored to prevent bad actors or advertisers from getting them?
That is a fantastic question and a huge, I feel like we could spend an hour talking about this. So it is really worthwhile, and I kind of skirted around that and didn't touch on any of that at all. So his question is like, what do we do about the security and privacy and data concerns on that side? And I will say like, half of my life I feel like is spent on like how do we develop these models. The other half right now is like just how do we store them? Because it is like, even aside from the security side, it's petabytes and petabytes of data, and how do you identify what do we need to store? How do we do that? And then how do we do it securely? So like we are constantly working, currently we're trying to do our pilots with the Duke hospital system, but we have a lot of calls with the Duke side, just trying to figure out how do you do this in a secure way. We're working with different cloud providers to see like what, how do you de-identify the information and where can you, when you store this, but when you get into wearables, de-identification ends up, it's much easier to re-identify because you have so much information about the patient via the wearable that you think it's de-identified, and then you add in one more piece of information and suddenly it is like re-identified. So it's definitely, there's whole meetings just trying to address this question, but it's something that needs to not be forgotten and is a key part of like how do we store it, where do we store it. A lot of what we're trying to get down to is like identify what these biomarkers are, so you could have the AI surrogates living on the edge devices where you don't have to store all of the like patient information and like really limit how much patient data needs to be stored over time, both to save space and cost on that end, but also just for the security side. But it's there's no easy answer right now, but it's something we're all talking about.
Okay. Thank you very much.